Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this episode, we'll discuss Ukraine and my ancestral trauma, why what is happening in the Ukraine is a history just repeating itself, and why this is happening again now. Let's get started. As many of you probably have heard by now, the Russian army has moved into sovereign Ukrainian land, and a full-blown war is happening at this moment. I, like many other people, were very shocked to see the level in which this is kind of escalated, and I found myself somehow feeling very differently than I've ever felt before. I guess for most of my adult life, I've never really been involved in a major conflict between world powers before, and obviously it's traumatizing for anybody watching this. For some reason, and it feels kind of beyond my understanding at times, I have felt this very close connection to this conflict. A little backstory, of course, is that my family on my mother's side is from a city called Yasenya, which during the pre-war and during the Second World War era would change countries because it was sort of laying in a border region. Sometimes this town would be in Czechoslovakia when it existed. Sometimes it would be in Hungary when the Hungarians took over. And in modern day, it actually sits within the Ukrainian borders. So I guess in a way that makes me sort of a Ukrainian descendant. I've really never considered myself to be Ukrainian in any sense of the word, of course. My grandmother always told me she was from Czechoslovakia, which existed for a brief period of time. But this conflict has really sparked some sort of strange feelings inside about my heritage. Watching on television these poor Ukrainian civilians trying to flee for their lives, or these men who are taking up arms, including and especially the politicians like the President Zelensky, who honestly has been nothing short of heroic in his resistance against all odds. I have never felt more compelled to actually go and see if I can do anything. And you know, I wouldn't consider myself to be very close to Ukraine, but maybe there's some sort of ancestral trauma there for a few reasons. One being that my family did come from a city that's now within the Ukraine, but the other part is sort of a flashback to World War II. Seeing the big, large power come in and start making a lot of trouble for the locals, these poor civilians who are just fleeing for their lives and taking over land that doesn't belong to them, honestly just makes me feel reminiscent in a weird sense of World War II and the Jewish population in Eastern Europe. I found myself feeling very attached and connected to those people who are in the Ukraine, and I really can't explain why. The only thing I could really come up with would be this ancestral trauma within me, almost like ingrained in my DNA, is a want to fight back and to actually go and do something for the Ukraine, just like I would have wanted someone to do for my ancestors in World War II. I have never wanted to go to war for any reason. I've never thought going to war would be necessary. Thankfully, I live in a country that is, for the most part, safe and doesn't require me to go to war. I used to sometimes sort of suggest that maybe if Israel called and Israel's existence was in jeopardy, I would do what I can for Israel as the home of the Jewish people. But never would I have thought that when a war breaks out in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe, that I would feel such a need to get up, fly to that country, and go and take up arms to protect it. Even though, obviously, I am not on a plane right now and can only do so much from where I am, I can say that I am actually very proud to hear that the Israeli government has offered to the Jewish citizens within Ukraine the ability to do what Israel was intended to provide a safe haven for Jewish people. And it really makes me smile on the inside to know that that option is there. What is more heroic are people like the President Zelensky and other Jewish people who have fought and are fighting to stay within Ukraine and to protect their land and their families. I heard a rabbi from the Chabad sect in Ukraine speaking about sort of the challenge between these Jewish men who have the option to leave because they're Jewish and to stay and fight, and that most of them are choosing to stay and fight. the similarities between the trauma of World War II and now are very evident. And maybe that's kind of where we're going to go next with this podcast, is we're going to look at the history comparison between World War II and now and see why history is repeating itself.